Hey there. Tonight we begin before sunrise, before temples, before kings, before the Nile had even learned how to shimmer under the moon. We begin in water without shore, in darkness without hedge, and in that darkness something impossible happens. A mind wakes up. Not a beast, not a storm, not a cry of war. A mind. And from that first clear thought, Thoth rises. So if this slow journey into Egyptian night sounds like your kind of thing, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you feel I have earned it. Then let the room grow softer. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breathing become a little slower, a little deeper. Tonight there is nowhere to rush. We are only following the oldest kind of silence, the kind that waits patiently until wisdom finally speaks. In the beginning there is none, the dark water before the world, not a sea in the ordinary sense, not waves, not shore, not salt on the lips, not a blue horizon meeting the sky. There is no sky yet, no horizon either, only depth after depth, a vast body of unlit possibility, heavy and still and almost thinking, if water can be said to think at all. If you were standing here with me, and of course, you are, in the only way that matters, I would tell you to imagine stepping into a place where distance means nothing. No up, no down, no east, no west, no bird calls, no rustle of papyrus, no temple bells, no human whisper. Even time has not yet found the courage to begin. The dark water simply holds everything that might one day exist. Mountains, stars, kings, quarrels, prayers, libraries, tears, moonlight on stone, and keeps it folded inside itself. Ancient Egyptian imagination understood this darkness in a way that still feels strangely modern. They did not picture creation beginning with noise and panic alone. They also imagined stillness, a deep and unnerving stillness, the kind that makes every later sound feel deliberate. Before the world can be built, something must notice the emptiness. Something must become conscious enough to say, this is chaos, and this is where order will begin. That is where Thoth appears. He does not arrive like a warrior kicking open a gate. He does not burst from the water in a flash of triumph. He comes into being through awareness. Honestly, I have always found that more unsettling and more beautiful. Other gods in old stories often inherit conquer, devour, seduce, or wrestle their way into importance. Thoth thinks. Then he knows himself. Then he speaks. Picture him slowly rising out of the endless dark, not dripping in the way a mortal body drips, but gleaming with that pale, silver-white clarity that belongs to moonlight and polished bone and fresh-cut alabaster. His body is human, upright, balanced, composed. His head is that of the ibis, elegant and strange, the long curved beak pointing toward a future that no one else can yet see. Mist gathers around him as if the dark water itself is unsure whether to let him go. He looks across a universe that has not yet become a universe. No stars burn over him. No earth waits below him. Yet something in him already understands measure, proportion, sequence, and law. He is not frightened by the void. He studies it. Then he performs the first act that will define him forever. He names himself, not loudly, not theatrically, no thunder, no trumpet from heaven. The oldest accounts do not need that sort of drama, because they understand a quieter truth. The right word, spoken with complete knowledge, can move reality more deeply than force. So Thoth shapes his own name and releases it into the darkness. The sound travels through none like a line of light drawn across black stone. With that naming, identity becomes real. The one who speaks is the one who knows. The one who knows can record. The one who records can preserve. And the one who preserves can resist the pull of chaos. In that sense, Thoth is not just born. He establishes the rule by which meaningful existence can happen at all. As he pronounces himself, symbols begin to form in the air around him. At first they flicker like tiny birds of light, no larger than leaves. Then they steady. They become signs, sacred marks, patterns that will one day turn into writing. Not ordinary writing, not shopping lists and tax notes and hasty complaints about neighbors stealing goats. That comes much later. These first signs are the bones of thought itself. They are the shapes through which the world will describe itself. You can almost imagine them hanging there in the darkness around his silver face, each one bright and weightless, each one carrying a principle. Number, measure, name, boundary, sequence, memory, record. These are not decorations. They are the earliest tools of civilization, still glowing, still warm from their own creation. When Thoth declares himself master of writing, writing comes into existence. When he claims measure, mathematics stirs. When he gives himself authority over sacred speech, language acquires force beyond mere sound. In this way, the Egyptians imagined him as something more than wise. He is the reason wisdom can be stored outside a living mind. He is the first keeper of memory. And there is something deeply calming in that, even here in the dark. Chaos can be endless, but once something is named, it is no longer completely wild. Once something is written, it no longer vanishes so easily. Once a pattern is measured, it can be returned to. The world becomes livable the moment it can be described. Thoth stands in the middle of primordial silence, holding this new power with absolute composure. No prideful flourish. No boast. He simply begins observing. That is very much his style. He is the sort of God who looks at infinity and reaches first for a ledger. A useful God. Really. Probably the kind every unruly pantheon secretly needs. There are storm gods for terror, sun gods for splendor, warrior gods for chaos in polished armor. But at some point, someone still has to sit down and make sure the universe is filed correctly. His ibis head matters here. To the Egyptians, the ibis was no random bird chosen because it looked interesting against temple walls. They watched it carefully. They saw how it stepped through Nile marshes with patience and precision, how its long beak entered mud and water with startling accuracy. how it seemed to know where nourishment hid beneath surfaces that looked empty to other eyes. That was Thoth. He would become the god who could reach into confusion and draw out truth without muddying it. His body is still, but his consciousness is already moving over everything that might be. He studies the texture of the dark. He measures the silence. He perceives tensions inside the waters of none that no other being could yet detect. Somewhere within this undivided expanse, sky and earth remain pressed together. Light waits inside darkness. Time waits inside stillness. Creation has not failed to begin. It is simply waiting for its first careful administrator. This, more than anything, is what makes Thoth feel so distinctive. He does not create by smashing chaos apart with brute strength. He creates by understanding where each thing should go. He is less like a conqueror and more like the first architect, the first scribe, the first mind patient enough to draft the universe before it unfolds. And because he is alone at first, his presence has a lonely grandeur to it. Imagine the silver-white figure standing in endless night with no audience and no applause, speaking laws into existence for a world that will not yet know his name. There is something touching about that. He is the first scholar at the edge of being, working before there is even a classroom, a student, or a lamp. The darkness around him begins to respond. Not dramatically. The shift is subtle. The waters of none no longer feel entirely blind. They feel observed. And once chaos is observed, it begins to behave differently. That is one of the oldest magical ideas in human storytelling. That attention changes things. Thoth does not need to force order all at once. He needs only to establish the possibility of it. So he lifts one hand. Between his fingers appears the first reed, slender and straight. Impossible in a world where reeds do not yet grow. Then papyrus unfolds, pale and smooth, like a piece of moonlight made solid. He is ready to write before there is anything properly built to describe. That, too, is a kind of miracle. The record comes before the event because the record is part of how the event becomes stable. Some scholars read these stories symbolically, and that is fair. We do not need to pretend an ibis-headed scribe literally stood in primordial floodwater with a notebook. But the symbolic truth is still powerful. The Egyptians understood that order depends on memory. Law depends on being preserved. Knowledge depends on being transmitted with care. The moment they imagined Thoth at creation, they were declaring something profound. The universe does not endure by force alone. It endures because someone remembers how it was meant to work. That idea feels almost tender tonight. Out in the human world, memory fails all the time. Kingdoms forget why they were built. Families forget what they owe each other. People forget promises by morning. Libraries burn. Names wear away. But here, at the beginning, memory enters creation as a god. That means forgetting is not the first law of existence. Recording is. He does not merely observe large things. That is another quiet wonder of him. He notices scales within scales. The vast separation of heaven from earth, yes, but also the tiny intervals by which larger harmonies hold. the spacing that will allow the moon to pass without scraping the dark edge of night, the distance between seed and flood, the pause between spoken word and written sign, the brief silence in which a judgment settles before anyone dares answer it. Thoth attends to all of that. Great order is made of small exactness. This is where his mood begins to feel almost monastic. No vanity, no impassions, only the deep satisfaction of right placement. You can imagine the first breath of wind moving past his cheek as Nut holds her arch above Geb, and Thoth writing down not only that the wind exists, but how it should travel, how it should turn, how it should announce weather without becoming destruction every hour of the day. Balance is everything. Too little motion and the world stagnates. Too much and it tears. The Egyptians were very clear on this point. Existence is not saved once and for all. It must be maintained. That is why Thoth matters so much. He is not merely present at the beginning. He establishes a way for the beginning to endure. He does not build a world and walk away from it with dusty hands and divine indifference. He creates a record against which the world can constantly be corrected. And perhaps that is why his presence feels so restful in a story meant for the dark. He is the opposite of panic, the opposite of waste, the opposite of blind reaction. Even when nothing yet has form, he behaves as if form is possible. There is comfort in that sort of intelligence, the sort that does not deny danger or confusion, but quietly arranges them into something survivable. Beneath him, the first surfaces begin holding the memory of future footsteps. Temple courts not yet quarried, marsh banks not yet softened by reed and ibis, tomb floors not yet worn smooth by priests carrying oil and incense in the blue dusk before burial rites. Thoth knows these things are coming, even if the world does not yet know how to host them. So he writes, with an eye toward ages beyond counting. A god of memory must always work for an audience not yet born. And because he works for that distant audience, his records are never merely descriptive. They are instructional. Here is how sky should remain sky. Here is how earth should answer wait. Here is how a river should return after absence. Here is how star and season must speak to each other. Here is how order looks when it is healthy. This is why later priests, scribes, and judges will belong to him. They will not just write. They will compare the living world to the original pattern and ask, where has it drifted? And how do we guide it back? It is lovely, in a slightly eerie way, to imagine that the first cosmic archive already contains the possibility of every later archive. The temple storeroom, the palace registry, the school exercise tablet, the funeral inscription, the letter from one anxious official to another explaining why grain counts do not match. All of them descend, however dimly, from this first god, standing in primordial dark, refusing to let reality remain undocumented. So the stillness around him deepens. But now it is a chosen stillness, not emptiness. The difference matters. Empty silence can feel like abandonment. Chosen silence feels like concentration. That is what fills the first world now. Concentration. Thoth listens to the cosmos as though it were already speaking in a language only he can hear. And with infinite patience, he writes back an answer strong enough to hold for millennia. So the god stands, silver, watchful, unmistakably calm, the first self-made intelligence in a reality still forming around him, the first scribe, preparing to define the terms by which creation may safely continue. His beak glints softly in the unlit dark. His reed hovers over the first unwritten law, and all of none seems to lean closer, as if even chaos has begun to understand that its reign of formlessness is ending. Not in violence, not yet. In writing. Soon the great work will continue. Heaven and earth will need to be separated. Distances will need to be fixed. Stars will need to be placed. But before any of that, there is this moment, this intimate and almost sacred pause in which Thoth stands alone with the first tools of record in his hand. And because he stands there, the world will not remain unmeasured for much longer. The dark does not vanish all at once after Thoth rises. That would be too simple, and Egyptian myth rarely wastes a chance to be grand and meticulous at the same time. Instead, the darkness begins to organize itself under his attention. The waters of Nun still stretch in every direction, but now they contain a watcher, a thinker, and that changes their mood. It is as if the void has realized someone is taking notes. Within the deep pressure of that unformed state, heaven and earth remain pressed together. Nut and Geb are not yet the graceful arch of sky and the fertile body of land that later stories will celebrate. They exist in compression, tangled within potential, close as breath against skin. There is no room for stars to travel, no room for birds to move, no room for wind. Everything future is folded into a single dark embrace. This is the moment when many gods and other traditions would solve the problem with noise and force. A blow, a command, a feat of strength. Thoth does something at once stranger and more reassuring. He calculates. He turns his clear gaze toward the still-bound cosmos and begins determining what distance must mean. How high should the sky be lifted so it can hold stars without collapsing? How far must earth lie beneath it so rivers can gather, mountains can rise, and creatures can breathe? What angles will allow the heavenly vault to endure? What sequence will keep collapse from following creation like a shadow? If you were standing here with me, you might laugh softly at the image of the first cosmic engineer showing up with immaculate paperwork while existence is still a swamp of possibility. But honestly, that is one of the reasons I like Thoth so much. He is the calm one in the room before the room exists. He lowers the reed. Papyrus steadies. The first true diagrams appear. These are not clumsy sketches. They are luminous plans, lines of light crossing one another in ratios that feel inevitable the moment they appear. Curves for the future arc of the heavens. Anchoring marks for the stars that will one day be read by priests and farmers and lovers lying on rooftops in summer heat. Measures for the path of the sun. Boundaries for the sleeping earth. Not one line is careless. Not one number is approximate. In Egyptian imagination, this matters deeply. The world survives because it is measured correctly. Flooding must come in season. Stars must return in order. The moon must wax and wane without forgetting itself. Seeds must know when to sleep and when to push toward light. All of that depends on a cosmos built with care. So Thoth writes, and what he writes becomes structure. As the first measurements settle, Nut begins to lift. Not suddenly. This is not a violent wrenching apart. It is slower, more solemn, and in some ways more moving than that. The sky goddess rises inch by inch, her vast body curving upward, her presence stretching into a future ceiling for all visible things. Beneath her, Geb settles into breadth and gravity, into the patient weight of land, into valleys not yet carved and plains not yet named. Thoth watches every degree of separation. He records the stress points. He notes where support is needed. He calculates where stars may be fastened, so the sky does not drift into ruin. He documents the pressure of cosmic expansion the way a master builder might document the settling of stone. Except here, the stones are worlds and the scaffolding is eternity. I have always found it strange that the old myths can feel so intimate even while dealing in impossible scale. Here is a god with an ibis head and a moon-bright mind, calmly making sure the universe does not tear itself in half during installation. As Nut rises, the first spaces begin to exist. Between sky and earth there is room now for wind, for weather, for language to travel, for birds to cross, for prayers to rise. Thoth gives each new interval attention. He does not merely admire what is happening. He verifies it. The width of dawn, the depth of shadow, the path where a storm may one day form and then dissolve, the gap through which moonlight can later fall on temple floors. Every part enters the ledger. That ledger is one of the quiet marvels of his mythology. It is not just a notebook. It is the first law archive. Every measurement Thoth records becomes binding. Every arrangement becomes precedent. If the Nile floods in rhythm, if stars return to their places, if seasons circle rather than shatter, it is because the world was not merely made, it was documented. And documentation, in Egyptian thought, is not secondary. It is power. As Earth settles into place, textures begin to emerge. The first rise of mountain spine, the long, soft fall of valley, beds where rivers will move later, hollows where marsh birds will stand in silver water. Even now, before life has fully adorned the world, Thoth is cataloging future possibility. He marks where the land may hold grain, where stone may be quarried, where hidden chambers of the dead may one day be cut into cliff and desert wall. His work is practical and sacred at once. That union matters. The Egyptians never drew a hard line between useful knowledge and holy knowledge. Measure a field correctly, and you preserve order. Place a temple correctly, and you reflect heaven on earth. Record a king's offering correctly, and you bind mortal action to divine witness. Thoth sits at the center of all that. As he writes, the first stars are fixed into the arch of Nut. You can imagine them appearing one by one, not in a chaotic spray, but in deliberate position, each a bright pin in a vast celestial fabric. Thoth notes their relation to one another. This one for navigation, this one for season, this one for omen, this one for memory. The sky is becoming readable. That is perhaps the most Thoth-like miracle of all. The heavens are not only beautiful, they are legible. What a comfort that must have been to the ancient mind, to look upward and believe the world has structure, to trust that movement is not random, to think that a God of wisdom has already gone ahead of you and arranged the stars with intelligible care. Below, Geb gathers shape more fully. Soil, stone, slopes, plains, future marsh, future desert, future green floodplain where empires will praise themselves and then crumble into dust. Thoth writes them all down without sentimentality. He has the long view. Kingdoms have not yet appeared, but already the land that will host them lies under his regard. He knows, perhaps, that every city will one day need a scribe as much as it needs a wall. The old stories say that Ma'at, truth, rightness, balance, proper order, becomes possible because the cosmos is arranged with precision. Thoth is essential to that. Ma'at cannot float about as a lovely idea without framework. It must be measured, written, maintained, referenced. There must be a record of what balance looks like, or else chaos can always pretend to be freedom. That is why Thoth becomes feared as well as loved. Once he has recorded a thing, excuses become harder. Once he has written the proper order, violations can be named. No god can claim ignorance forever if the law has already been entered into the cosmic archive. No mortal can pretend consequence does not exist if actions are preserved in divine memory. There is comfort in that, but also unease. A record keeper is a gentle companion when you are honest, and a dreadful one when you are not. Still, at this early hour of creation, his presence feels generous. The world is being given not merely form, but coherence. Thoth records boundaries so things may flourish within them. He writes distances so sky does not crush earth. He fixes cycles so living beings can learn trust. Imagine how unbearable existence would be if the stars forgot their paths every few nights, if dawn arrived at random, if rivers spilled with no rhythm, if death and birth wandered without pattern. Thoth prevents that future before it begins. He moves now across the new-made spaces, still not walking in the human sense, more like gliding through intention itself. Reed in hand, papyrus against his palm, he pauses over each emerging feature. Here, a river course. Here, a high ridge. Here, the deep places where hidden water may sleep beneath stone. Here, the future marshes where ibis birds will one day step and unwittingly imitate their own divine patron. There is a subtle humor in that. Thoth, who gave the universe measure, will later be symbolized by a bird that spends much of its life poking around in mud. The Egyptians understood something very wise there. Truth is often hidden in low places. The first winds begin to stir in the space between Nut and Geb. Thoth notes direction, pressure, interval. He defines where cloud may gather and where clear air may remain. He does not create weather for drama. He creates it for balance. Rain where growth must be fed, dryness where stone must stand, breath where lungs will later labor in prayer, laughter, and grief. You can feel the world becoming habitable under his discipline. At times like this, he seems less like a single figure and more like a principle with hands. That is one of the wonderful tensions in Egyptian religion. Their gods are persons, yes, vivid, quarrelsome, beautiful, dangerous. But they are also functions of reality, truths in form. Thoth is a divine person, but he is also the fact that intelligent order underlies survival. He is the reason a blueprint matters, the reason precedent matters, the reason words matter enough to outlast breath. As his work continues, he begins not only to document the physical world, but to establish procedures for the divine world that will inhabit it. This is easy to overlook, but it may be one of his greatest accomplishments. Gods, as mythology repeatedly proves, are magnificent and often terrible at administration. They are emotional. They are proud. They carry grievances across centuries. Left to themselves, they might turn creation into a palace full of arguments and broken furniture. Thoth sees that coming from very far away. So before the divine society fully blossoms, he drafts roles. This one governs sky. This one governs earth. This one watches water. This one speaks judgment. This one carries the sun. This one keeps watch in hidden hours. Authority is not merely assumed. It is entered. Responsibilities are not left to mood. They are assigned. In this sense, Thoth creates not just a cosmos, but a bureaucracy, which sounds less poetic than it is. The bureaucracy of the sacred is one of Egypt's great inventions. Order must be renewed through office, duty, record, and right. Somewhere in the dim splendor of this first age, the universe receives its earliest filing system. He records divine actions too. That becomes crucial later. No god can claim to have done what was not done. No god can erase another's contribution simply by shouting more loudly. No cosmic event is left to rumor. Thoth writes, and the writing stands. That makes him indispensable, and perhaps quietly dangerous. Truth has a way of unsettling those who hope memory can be bullied. The scale of his record-keeping grows astonishingly large. He writes the first mountain into order, then the first basin, then the hidden relation between the movement of stars and the eventual flooding of rivers. He writes the way energy flows between realms. He writes the cost of imbalance. He writes the early karmic logic by which action will ripple outward and return. That last idea will matter more and more as the myths deepen. For now, it is enough to feel that nothing is separate anymore. Creation is not just objects scattered in a container. It is relationships, distances, ratios, causes, results. Thoth understands that before anyone else, you can picture his cosmic archive already growing immense. Rolls of first law, tablets of measure, star maps still damp with divine ink, lists of what belongs where, lists of what must never be confused, perhaps even little notes to himself, though I like to imagine a god of writing needing no reminders. Then again, if anyone would make organized reminders just for the pleasure of having them neatly arranged, it would be him. There is also something serene in his patience. He does not rush to populate the world before its structure is sound. He does not hurry into spectacle. He secures the frame first. So many disasters in myth, and in ordinary life for that matter, come from building on weak measure. Thoth refuses that mistake at the level of creation itself. As the cosmos steadies, a new feeling spreads through it. Not excitement exactly, assurance. The sort that arrives when a bridge holds, when a calculation balances, when a map finally makes sense of a wilderness. The dark water of none has not disappeared, but it has been answered. Its endlessness now meets line, rule, and intention. Thoth pauses. The reed lifts. Around him the sky remains aloft. The land remains set. The first stars keep their stations. The first winds keep their route. Nothing collapses. He has done what only a mind devoted to order could do. He has turned possibility into arrangement, and yet his work is far from finished. A world with structure still needs language. A cosmos with law still needs interpreters. A divine order still needs one being capable of moving between symbol and truth, between written sign and living event. Soon his forms, ibis and baboon, will matter more deeply. Soon scribes, astronomers, healers, and judges will begin to feel his shadow on their shoulders. Soon the universe will need not only its architect, but its faithful witness. For now, though, we remain in the hush after first construction, when heaven and earth have just learned their places, and the silver-white God stands among his luminous records, calm as moonlight on still water, already preparing the next page. The page turns gently now, and as the first structure of the world settles into place, another question rises out of the hush. If Thoth is the mind that measures creation, why does he wear the face of a bird, and at times the shape of a baboon waiting for dawn? The old Egyptians looked at animals with an attention that feels almost reverent now. They did not simply ask what a creature looked like. They asked what it knew how to do. They watched posture, patience, movement, timing. They watched which animals seemed to belong to sunlight, which to marsh, which to desert, which to the dark riverbank before morning. They believed nature was crowded with meanings, and that the gods were not hidden from those meanings, but woven through them. So when Thoth appears with the head of an ibis, it is not a strange decoration chosen for theatrical effect. It is a statement about intelligence itself. Picture the ibis in the Nile marsh. White feathers holding the first gold of morning. Long black beak, curved with a precision no bronze tool could quite imitate. Thin, careful legs entering shallow water without fuss. It does not stamp and scatter everything in sight. It does not lunge wildly. It poses. It studies. Then, with one exact motion, it reaches into mud and water and draws out what was hidden there. That is Thoth. He is the one who can move through confusion without becoming confused by it. The one who reaches into the thick and murky places of existence and retrieves a clean truth from beneath the surface. The one who knows that the world rarely gives up its secrets to the loud. If you were standing here with me beside some imagined Nile marsh in the blue cold before sunrise, I would ask you to watch that bird for a while. Notice how little it wastes. Notice the economy of movement, the strange serenity, the almost scholarly patience. It feels like a creature made for exactness. No wonder a civilization devoted to rhythm, record, and sacred repetition looked at that shape and thought, Yes, wisdom might wear this face. Thoth's beak matters as much as his gaze. Ancient artists drew it with loving care because it resembles the tool of the scribe. Long, narrow, sensitive, able to make a mark with very little force. The same head that can probe a riverbank can also carve law into memory. His very anatomy declares that knowledge must be extracted carefully and then preserved with equal care. His eyes are another matter. They are sharp, alert, and patient enough to notice pattern. A lesser god might revel in spectacle. Thoth pays attention to arrangement. He sees how one star speaks to another across distance, how one action shifts the weight of a future judgment, how one careless lie in a court today may become famine, revolt, or grief generations later. His intelligence is not merely brilliant. It is relational. He sees webs, not fragments. There are also the long legs of the ibis, which the Egyptians understood in their own poetic way. They allow the bird to pass through water without stirring every hidden thing into useless cloud. Thoth similarly moves through mystery without making it more obscure. He enters complexity and leaves it clearer than he found it. That quality, more than any simple cleverness, is why he becomes the god of scribes, judges, astronomers, healers, and priests. All of them need clarity more than excitement. And yet Thoth is not only ibis. At certain hours, especially near dawn, he appears as a sacred baboon. This can sound odd to modern ears, but the baboon was no comic creature to the Egyptians. They watched those animals greet the sunrise with upright stillness and sudden cries. They noticed their expressive hands, their intelligence, their social awareness, their almost unsettling resemblance to human concentration. The baboon seemed half wild and half reflective, a creature balanced between instinct and observation. In that, too, Thoth found a worthy form. When he takes the baboon body, another side of his wisdom comes forward. The ibis suggests elegance, measurement, refinement. The baboon suggests alertness, problem-solving, memory carried in muscle and gesture, intelligence made physical. The hands of the baboon matter enormously. These are hands that can hold, sort, arrange, manipulate. In temple art, the baboon form of Thoth often looks ready to write, ready to count, ready to weigh, ready to point out where a false balance has entered the room. I have always liked that the god of knowledge is not trapped in one shape. It suggests that wisdom itself is more agile than we often imagine. Some truths arrive with quiet grace, like the ibis stepping through silver reeds. Others arrive with more embodied force, like the baboon greeting dawn with bright eyes and quick hands. Thoth contains both. His baboon form also belongs to the threshold of day. Before the sun lifts fully, before the world has decided how it will use its hours, the baboon Thoth is already awake. This is perfect. The god of thought should be present in the seam between dark and light, where decisions begin. In that hour, he seems to greet Ra, not as a servant flatteringly applauding a king, but as the one mind in the cosmos fully prepared for the labor of another day. As these sacred forms become understood, Thoth's authority spreads into human life. Scribes begin under his protection because writing in Egypt is no ordinary trade. To write is to stabilize reality, to record a harvest, a judgment, a ritual formula, a boundary line, a kingly decree, a prayer for the dead, a medical instruction. All of that means rescuing something from disappearance. The scribe does on a human scale what Thoth did at creation. He makes memory durable. Imagine an early Egyptian scribe seated cross-legged in filtered temple light. Papyrus spread over his knees. Reed pen sharpened. Black ink for ordinary record. Red ink for warning. Names of danger. Beginnings of sacred sections. Around him, the air smells faintly of dust, reed fiber, old linen, and lamp smoke. He bends over the page with the same kind of patience the ibis showed in water. In every careful mark there is devotion, because every mark belongs to Thoth. These scribes did not think of themselves as merely literate officials moving grain figures from one column to another, though they certainly did plenty of that. They believed writing had divine ancestry. The first hieroglyphs were not a convenience. They were a sacred technology. A sign did not just stand for a thing. It participated in its being. To write well was to align with divine intelligence. To write badly was not merely sloppy. It was a small offense against order. That is why the scribal profession carried such prestige. Egypt was a civilization of record. Fields had to be measured after the Nile flood. Taxes had to be tracked. Temples had to preserve offerings, lineages, festivals, inventories, legal decisions, repairs, the celestial observations. Tombs had to be inscribed. The dead had to be named correctly if they hoped to continue. Every one of those acts placed human life under the long, pale shadow of Thoth. He gives scribes more than literacy. He gives them posture of mind, patience before precision, reverence before speech, care before judgment. Even a simple list becomes holy if it preserves rightful order. That is an extraordinary idea. It means the sacred is not only in the thunderclap, the miracle, the blazing temple procession. It is also in the clean line, the accurate number, the title placed beside the proper name without error. This is where Thoth begins to feel almost modern again. Great civilizations do not survive on inspiration alone. They survive on records, on calendars, on archive, on trained memory. Egypt knew that. And because it knew that, it gave all those fragile instruments a god. Thoth also fathers hieroglyphic writing in a deeper sense, not simply as patron, but as inventor. The old stories present him as the one who understands how image can hold sound, and how sound can carry law, prayer, history, and command across generations. That achievement is astonishing when you pause over it. To turn speech into visible form is to defy death a little. The speaker may vanish. The sign remains. So he studies the world for shapes that can bear layered meaning. Water as flowing line, reed as stalk, bird as life, and sky and sound and omen. Eye as perception and protection and divine awareness. A symbol can do many jobs at once if it is built carefully enough. That is a very Thoth-like principle. Compression without confusion. density without collapse. And because Egyptian writing works through sound and image together, it feels especially worthy of him. It is not a blunt code. It is a shimmering system where visual beauty and intellectual precision walk together. A prayer can be a picture. A name can be an act of protection. A spell can be art. A royal title can be architecture in miniature. Of course, the god of wisdom would prefer such a script. The more one thinks about it, the more his entire mythology becomes a defense of preservation. Without him, thought remains trapped in the skull, and once that skull returns to dust, the thought goes with it. With him, thinking can be stored, measured, copied, sent forward. This leads naturally to one of his grandest domains, the divine library. The Egyptians imagined that Thoth kept not a single room of scrolls, but a cosmic archive vast enough to hold the history of gods and mortals alike. Every action entered, every law recorded, every prayer heard and placed somewhere in the ordering of things. It is less a library in the cozy modern sense, and more a complete memory apparatus for the universe. Still, I cannot help imagining rooms. Long halls, lit by oil flame and pale reflected moon glow. Shelves heavy with rolled papyri. Cedar chests, smelling of resin and age. Labels tied in neat strips. Protective formulas painted over doorways. Sandaled feet passing softly over stone. Somewhere in the distance, a reed pen scratching. Deliberate and unhurried. And always that sense that one is surrounded not just by information, but by witness. In Thoth's library are the records of creation, the names of stars, the roots of planets, the true causes of storms, the hidden motives of kings, the balances and imbalances of hearts, the designs for rights, for healing, for judgment, for architecture aligned with heaven. There are probably shelves full of things no mortal should ever read, and Thoth, being sensible, would certainly know exactly where he put them. The organization of such a library must have been one of his secret joys. Egyptian thought loved ordering principles, categories, sacred lists, sequences of names, cycles of festivals, measured repetitions. Thoth takes all of that to its divine extreme. Nothing is merely piled. Everything has place. Everything can be found. Everything cross-references something else. A law connects to a star pattern. A ritual text to a healing formula. A royal decree to an earlier precedent. A soul to the trace of every action it has made in the world. That web of connection is perhaps the deepest form of wisdom the Egyptians gave him. Thoth does not know things as separate items. He knows them in relation. So when a physician asks what herb belongs to fever, the answer may include moon phase, season, body fluid, spoken words, and proper timing. When an architect asks how to align a temple, the answer may involve cardinal directions, rising stars, flood level, dynastic symbolism, and the procession route of a festival not yet invented. When a judge asks what justice requires, the answer is never merely the event of the hour, but the whole pattern in which that event sits. This is why he becomes patron of far more than writing. Mathematics belongs to him. Measurement belongs to him. Astronomy belongs to him. Medicine, in part. Law, very much so. Magic, absolutely. The same mind that writes the world can also calculate it, diagnose it, and if needed, repair it. His relation to magic is especially important. Egyptian magic is not stage trickery. It is the manipulation of hidden correspondences through right knowledge. Words matter. Names matter. Timing matters. Gesture matters. Symbol matters. In other words, the whole system naturally falls under Thoth's jurisdiction. He is the one who understands why a spell works, not merely that it does. He is the theorist behind divine practice. That makes him invaluable and also a little dangerous. The keeper of formulas is always a figure to approach with respect. There are healing spells in his archive, yes, but also protections, bindings, revelations, judgments. Some knowledge liberates, some knowledge confines. A god of wisdom must know both. The temple schools that later grow under his influence are natural descendants of this library. Young scribes learning signs, priests learning hymns, astronomers charting movements over roofs at night, judges copying old cases to train discernment. The air in such places would have been full of murmured repetition, dust, oil, concentration. To study was not separate from worship. To learn a sign correctly was to step a little closer to Thoth. And this produces one of the most moving elements in his mythology. Wisdom is not reserved only for gods. It can descend. Carefully, gradually, through discipline, through reverence, through study that humbles rather than inflates. Thoth stands at the threshold of that possibility. He does not simply own knowledge. He transmits it, though never carelessly. The moon becomes part of this story too, because by now, his cool intelligence is already beginning to gather lunar associations. The moon is measured light, borrowed light, thoughtful light. It does not blaze and conquer like the sun. It reveals by degrees. It favors scribes, travelers, watchers, lovers, mourners, those who work by reflection and patience. That is Thoth's mood exactly. One can imagine his library under moonlight. Not silent, because no true archive is entirely silent, but hushed, pages turning, pens moving, someone whispering a name to be copied correctly, someone reciting a hymn from memory against the page, someone consulting an old astronomical table, while outside the Nile drifts black and bright beneath stars first fixed by the god himself. It is from within that atmosphere that the next great crisis of the divine world will eventually be handled. Because knowledge must do more than preserve. It must intervene when order breaks. A library can become a court. A scribe can become a judge. A keeper of records can become the one being all sides fear to face when truth must finally be spoken aloud. And that is where Thoth's calm intelligence will be tested most deeply, not merely in the writing of law, but in the repair of a cosmos wounded by jealousy, murder, and grief. Soon Osiris will die. The first sign that peace has become fragile is not always a battle. Sometimes it is a mood in the air, a tension at the edge of celebration, a silence inside one face while everyone else is still smiling. Egyptian myth understands this too well, and nowhere more painfully than in the story of Osiris, Set, and the long grief that pulls Thoth from quiet record-keeper into the hard labor of divine judgment. By the time this crisis begins, the world is no longer new. Fields are known. The Nile rises and falls in sacred rhythm. Temples stand. Kings rule by divine pattern. The gods each hold their domains with enough dignity to make the universe feel stable, at least from a distance. Osiris rules with gentleness, or something close to it for a god. He is associated with growth, grain, lawful kingship, fertility, renewal. Under him the land feels taught, instructed, civilized. Bread rises from orderly labor. Fields answer flood. Human beings live not just in survival, but in pattern. There are rites, seasons, proper offerings, proper judgments. The world under Osiris has the flavor of settled things, and Set hates it. Set is not merely evil in the simple way later storytellers often prefer. He is harsher than that, more necessary, and therefore more dangerous. He belongs to storm, desert, violence, disruption, wild force, the rough edge of being that refuses to be tamed into neat harvest and courtly language. There is power in him, undeniable power, and a kind of truth as well. A universe with only calm order can harden into lifelessness. A world with no desert, no shock, no challenge becomes soft and perhaps false. But Set does not know how to remain a necessary tension. He becomes envy. Imagine him watching the Nile Valley under Osiris. Green bands of life laid beside water. Storehouses filled. People praising the just king. Ceremonies performed in balance. Music in courtyards. Smoke rising from temples and clean columns at dusk. To everyone else, it looks like flourishing. To Set, it looks like exclusion. The old stories understand that resentment can ripen for a long time in silence. It gathers detail. It studies routines. It learns where joy becomes vulnerable. Set does not rush at once into open war. He plots. He lets his grievance become a structure. In that way, he becomes more frightening than a mere embodiment of wild rage. He becomes a mind corrupted by appetite. Thoth sees much of this. Of course, that is both his power and his burden. To be the divine witness means seeing danger while it is still half concealed. He records tensions. He notes changing patterns in speech, conduct, allegiance. He understands that the conflict growing inside Set is larger than a family quarrel. It is the ancient contest between order and disruption gathering itself into personal form. Still, record does not always equal prevention. The feast is prepared. This is where the story grows softer and darker at once. There is music, food, light on polished surfaces, guests gathered, divine and mortal eyes pleased by splendor. Somewhere servants move with cups and platters. Somewhere laughter rises. Somewhere Osiris, secure in his place and perhaps too trusting, enters a room where betrayal has already been measured down to the length of his body. Set has commissioned a beautiful chest, a coffin of exquisite workmanship. It gleams. It attracts attention. Craft has been bent toward malice, which may be one of the saddest turns any tool can suffer. He announces, lightly, that the chest will be given to whoever fits it perfectly. A game, a spectacle, an amusement for the feast. One by one the guests try. They recline inside, laugh, fail to match its proportions, step out again. The room warms with anticipation. It is all very social, very harmless on the surface. That is often how carefully planned harm prefers to dress itself. Then Osiris enters the chest. Of course it fits. It was built for him. The lid slams. Conspirators rush forward. Seals are fixed. In some versions, molten lead hardens the closure. In others, the binding is magical as well as physical. Either way, the point is the same. Breath is taken. Voice is denied. The lawful king is transformed from ruler into trapped body in an instant. The image is almost unbearable, not because it is loud, but because it is enclosed. The horror is not battle but confinement. One moment feast, the next coffin. One moment speech, the next silence. The chest is carried out and cast into the Nile. That river, which under good order nourishes kingdoms, becomes the bearer of concealed murder. It receives the sealed body and carries it away through current and reeds and moonlit water, farther and farther from rescue. There is a terrible elegance in the image. The same Egypt that flourished under Osiris now becomes the landscape through which his absence is extended, and almost at once the world begins to feel wrong. This is one of the things Egyptian myth does with deep intelligence. It does not treat divine violence as private. When gods break proper order, the land registers it. Floods turn erratic. Fertility falters. The atmosphere of the kingdom changes. The death of a just principle is not confined to palace walls. It enters the fields. Isis refuses to surrender to this loss. Her love for Osiris is one of the great engines of Egyptian myth, and also one of its great disciplines. She does not merely collapse into mourning. She searches. She becomes patient, relentless, precise. In another sort of story, grief might be loud and immediate. Here, grief is work. She follows signs, rumors, trace, currents. She crosses lands. She questions. She transforms herself when needed. She uses wisdom, magic, devotion, cunning. And in this long labor, Thoth becomes essential. He is not the hero in the emotional sense. This is not his beloved lost to the river. Yet no search of this scale can succeed without record, pattern, and divine analysis. Thoth gathers what can be known. He reconstructs roots. He studies current and timing. He draws connection from fragment to fragment. When hearts break, someone still has to keep the map from tearing. That is his role. Eventually, the chest is found far from where it was cast, enclosed within a tree. hidden inside another form of growth and silence. In some tellings, the tree has been cut and made part of a palace, so that the dead king stands concealed in architecture. Grief inside structure, memory inside timber. It is exactly the sort of layered symbolic image Egyptian myth loves. The lost body is not gone, only embedded, hidden, waiting. Isis recovers him. For a brief moment, there is possibility of restoration. The body is brought back. Ritual care begins. Magic gathers. The hope is not absurd in this universe. Gods are not mortals, and Egypt never imagines death as simple disappearance. Form can be altered. Breath can return. Name can revive what flesh alone cannot sustain. But Set discovers the hidden body. What follows is one of the darkest acts in all Egyptian myth, and even softened for a sleep story, it remains dreadful. Rage drives him past murder into desecration. He tears Osiris apart, piece by piece, and scatters the fragments across Egypt so that no whole can easily be reassembled. This is not just cruelty. It is an attack on continuity itself. It is an attempt to make restoration impossible by destroying pattern. If Thoth represents ordered memory, Set here represents shattered record. The land is wounded again, not only because a god has been ruined, but because coherence has been deliberately broken. Dismemberment in this myth is more than physical violence. It is cosmic interruption. A king cannot rule if his body is fragment. A cycle cannot renew if its symbol is scattered. What has been cut apart must somehow be known again. So Isis searches once more, and this time the labor is far more sorrowful. No single hidden chest now, no single route to follow. Only fragments, remains, traces of wholeness dispersed into marsh, field, riverbank, sand, shrine, memory. It is here that Thoth's gifts become absolutely necessary. He records every recovered piece. Do not underestimate the tenderness of that. In a universe where writing stabilizes existence, to name and document each fragment is already to begin healing. He does not let loss remain anonymous. He identifies, orders, cross-references, preserves. This was found here. This belongs with that. This tear can be traced to this act of violence. This body will not vanish into formless ruin if memory can still perform its work. I have always thought there is something profoundly consoling in that image. When suffering shatters a life, the first mercy may be accurate witness, not the immediate fixing, not the loud promise that everything will soon be restored. Simply the refusal to let the breakage become meaningless. Thoth offers that first. The search expands across Egypt. Isis grieves and works. Nephthys aids her. Anubis becomes involved. Other gods lend strength where they can. Yet the one who keeps the effort coherent is still Thoth. He makes lists, if I may put it that way, without reducing the sacred. Lists of fragments, lists of locations, lists of ritual requirements, lists of what must be purified, restored, joined, spoken, guarded. He turns despair into procedure, and procedure into a path. This is why he is so indispensable in myth. He does not replace passion. He serves it. Love without order can exhaust itself in circles. Order without love becomes cold. In the search for Osiris, Isis provides the fire. Thoth provides the method. At last, the restoration begins. Imagine a chamber prepared in utmost seriousness. Oil lamps low and steady. Linen laid out. Incense slow in the air. Sacred words ready. Silence, not empty now, but focused. The recovered body parts placed carefully, reverently. According to forms and correspondences Thoth understands better than anyone. Here, the divine scribe becomes almost a surgeon of cosmic continuity. He knows how things were first made. He has the original patterns from creation itself. If anyone can guide damaged divinity back toward coherent form, it is the God who wrote measure into existence, before there were temples to thank him for it. So, he works with Isis. This matters. He does not seize the miracle from her. He collaborates. That too is part of his wisdom. Knowledge without humility would make him intolerable. Instead, he lends structure to devotion. He provides formulas, names, proper sequence, corrections, safeguards. He ensures that each act of reassembly aligns with deeper law, rather than becoming wild, desperate improvisation. The body returns toward wholeness. And yet, restoration is never simple return. This is one of the great Egyptian insights. Once death has happened, the old life is not merely resumed untouched. Osiris can be restored, but not to naive kingship. He has crossed a threshold. He has become a being marked by death, by absence, by reassembly. He cannot simply walk back into his old palace and pretend the universe has learned nothing. Thoth knows this even while the work continues. The restored Osiris must take a new office. Not king of the living Nile kingdom as before, but ruler of the dead, lord of the West, judge and guarantor of continuity beyond death. This is not a defeat. It is a transformation of function. The wound is not erased. It is given place within order. And again, Thoth is the one who makes that transition administratively possible. He is, in some sense, the first god to understand that a changed condition requires a changed institution. The cosmos cannot survive by pretending nothing happened. It must create a new framework. So he drafts the protocols of the underworld court. He defines how souls will be evaluated. He establishes relations between death, truth, memory, and justice. The very tragedy caused by Set becomes the foundation of a more complex and morally serious universe. But before all this is fully settled, there must be tribunal. Set cannot simply be allowed to walk away under a cloud of vague disapproval. The assault has been too great. Murder, desecration, assault on kingship, assault on continuity, assault on Ma'at itself. The divine world must respond in law, not merely fury, or else all the writing Thoth has ever done will amount to decoration. So a court is convened. I like to imagine this court with immense stillness around it. Gods assembled, each carrying power enough to crack mountains, and yet seated in procedure because order demands more than force. Thoth presides, or if not formally presides, then shapes every meaningful part of the process. He has the record. He has the facts. He has the capacity to separate grievance from evidence, and evidence from excuse. Set is not without argument. That is important. Egyptian myth does not weaken itself by making him a simple, sneering villain with nothing to say. He represents force, change, challenge, the necessary presence of harshness in the world. There are truths attached to his domain. Excessive order can suffocate. Growth sometimes needs disruption. The desert is deadly. Yes, but also purifying, testing, boundary making. Thoth acknowledges all of that. This may be the most difficult and admirable thing about him. He does not protect order by lying about chaos. He knows Set has a place. The problem is not that chaos exists. The problem is that it overreached, became personal appetite, violated boundary, sought to destroy rather than challenge. It is one thing for the desert to exist beyond the fields, quite another for it to invade the principle of lawful renewal itself and tear it apart. In the court, Thoth establishes precedent. Set may embody necessary force, but no necessary force may dissolve the larger balance that grants it legitimacy. No grievance permits murder. No cosmic function justifies desecration. No claim to vitality excuses annihilation of continuity. It is a magnificent piece of divine reasoning, and very Egyptian in its insistence that balance is subtler than victory. Osiris is not restored to old life. Set is not obliterated. Instead, offices are differentiated. Limits are established. The cosmos survives not because one side simply crushes the other, but because Thoth writes a more nuanced order than either passion alone could produce. That does not make the process easy. Law rarely heals grief quickly. The chamber of judgment, whether in heaven or later in the underworld, is not a place where tears are denied. It is a place where tears are not allowed to become the only instrument. Thoth holds everyone, even gods, to procedure, and procedure, in this myth, is sacred compassion in disciplined form. By the end of this long crisis, Thoth is no longer just the quiet architect of stars and symbols. He has become the mediator without whom even gods might devour one another into ruin. He has proven that knowledge is not fragile ornament. It is the only thing sturdy enough to carry grief toward justice without letting grief become new chaos. Soon that role will deepen even further. The scales of judgment, the weighing of hearts, the record of deeds, the terrifying nearness of Ammit. All of that belongs to the world made possible by what happened here. Because once Osiris takes his place among the dead, the question changes for every soul. Not merely how did you live, but what does truth weigh when Thoth is writing it down? The chamber of judgment does not begin with shouting. It begins with stillness. After the long sorrow of Osiris, after the scattered body and the careful work of restoration, the universe becomes more solemn. Something has changed in the architecture of reality. Death is no longer merely an end that must be mourned or a rupture that must be repaired. It has become a place of procedure, a realm with offices, thresholds, witnesses, records, and consequences. And wherever procedure enters sacred space, Thoth is never far away. So imagine, very slowly, the Hall of Two Truths. Imagine a vast room, cool as stone before dawn. The floor, smooth, beneath bare feet. The air touched by incense, but not heavily. This is not a place built to overwhelm the senses. It is built to sharpen them. Columns rise like ordered reeds along the edges. Lamps burn without flicker. Shadows stay where they belong. Nothing spills. Nothing rushes. Nothing distracts. Every line of the chamber seems to say the same thing. Be precise now. Be honest now. Nothing confused will survive here. At the center stand the scales. They are not ordinary scales enlarged for dramatic effect. They are instruments of cosmic proportion, delicate and absolute. Their beam is fine, their balance exact. One side will receive the heart of the dead. The other, the feather of Maat, light as breath, light as truth, and yet heavier than any lie ever told. Near the scales stands Anubis, grave and attentive. Near him waits Ammit, dreadful in her stillness. Bard, crocodile, Bad lion, part river horse, made from the hardest shapes of fear. And beside the scales, not pacing, not boasting, not trembling, stands Thoth with palette and reed pen, ready to write. I have always found that image more powerful than any battlefield, not because it is louder, but because it is so calm. There is nothing frantic in divine judgment. That is what makes it terrible. The dead soul has already crossed the threshold. There is no army to gather, no king to persuade, no road back to yesterday. There is only the question of weight. And Thoth records everything. This role grows naturally from all that he has already become. He was the one who helped measure creation. He was the one who stabilized divine law. He was the one who recorded crimes and repairs in the struggle of Osiris and Set. Now he becomes the keeper of moral consequence itself, not the punisher in the crude sense, not the beast that devours, not even the one who places the heart on the scale. He is the witness whose writing makes the verdict real. The dead do not wander into this chamber unannounced. Before the weighing, there is approach. There are gates, names to be spoken, formulas to remember, guardians to appease, directions to follow through the dim geography of the Duat. By the time a soul reaches the hall, it has already been stripped of many illusions. The body is gone. Titles have thinned. Wealth has become useless. The long, soft fabric of excuses begins to tear. Yet the heart remains. This is important. In Egyptian thought, the heart is not only an organ. It is memory, conscience, intention, character. It is the inward record a person carries through life, whether anyone else sees it clearly or not. The heart remembers what the tongue tried to hide. It remembers meanness done in private, tenderness offered without witness, betrayals excused as necessity, loyalties carried quietly for years. You can deceive a neighbor. You can flatter a king. You can rearrange a story for your own comfort. But the heart has already written its own account. That is why it is weighed. Thoth understands this with a kind of grave intimacy. He does not leer into the soul. He does not enjoy exposure. He simply knows that justice requires a document deeper than reputation. Every city has its gossip. Every family its preferred version of itself. Every ruler his inscription proclaiming glory. But none of that can serve in the hall of two truths. The universe requires better records than vanity provides. So the dead soul arrives and begins the declarations. These are often called the negative confessions, though the phrase can sound a little dry in modern ears. In practice, they are more intimate, more trembling. The soul stands before the judges and says, one after another, what evils it has not done. I have not stolen. I have not murdered. I have not cheated the hungry. I have not lied in matters of justice. I have not polluted the water. I have not caused needless grief. The list is long, and it should be. Human life is inventive in its harms. What moves me in these confessions is not simply their moral force, but their texture. They reveal what kind of civilization Egypt wanted to be. The sins are not only grand crimes, they are social wounds, cruelty in trade, false weights, neglect of the poor, abuse of speech, contempt for sacred things, violence toward the vulnerable. The confessions tell us that the heart is measured not only by private purity, but by how one moved among others in the shared fabric of life. And Thoth listens. He knows every formula. He knows when a declaration rings true and when it lands with the soft, hollow note of something rehearsed too neatly. He has no need to interrupt often. The hall itself, shaped by Ma'at, presses against deception. Still, his pen waits. A line may be entered. A hesitation noted. A life is not reduced to one phrase, but the phrases matter. Words always matter near Thoth. Words are part of reality. Spoken carefully, they reveal. Spoken falsely, they burden the speaker before the scale ever moves. Once the declarations are complete, the weighing begins. Anubis handles the mechanics with ritual care. The heart is brought forward. The feather is set in place. The beam settles, trembles, seeks exactness. In that suspended instant, the entire life of the dead seems to gather itself into pressure and poise. Around the hall there is no murmur. Even fear becomes quiet. The only true movement is the almost invisible searching of the scale for balance. Thoth watches the beam. His attention here is unlike any other kind of seeing. It is not emotional, though he is not empty. It is not cold, though it is disciplined. He sees measurement as sacred truth. If the heart lifts too easily, if it sinks, if it finds equilibrium, he records that relation with perfect care. There is no embellishment, no rhetorical flourish. A soul is not saved by dramatic language in this room. It is known by weight. Some hearts balance well. I do not imagine those souls as perfect. Egypt rarely expects perfection in the thin, simple sense. A heart can be human, flawed, tired, uncertain, and still light enough for truth if it has not made itself dense with deliberate cruelty and hardened selfishness. There are souls whose lives were humble, nearly invisible to history. Yet when the scale receives them, The beam moves with beautiful restraint. A baker who gave fair measure. A mother who protected what she could. A clerk who refused a convenient lie. A worker who kept faith even when no one praised him. These lives do not glitter in monuments, but Thoth writes them with the same seriousness he would grant a king. I like that very much about this system. Grandeur does not impress the feather. Weight does. Other hearts fail. Again, the failure is not theatrical at first. The beam dips. The heart settles too low. Perhaps only a little at first, then unmistakably. The heaviness is not physical flesh. It is accumulation, repeated dishonesty, enjoyment of harm, indifference sharpened into habit. The soul may still protest internally. It may still cling to its own self-story. But the scale has no patience for inner propaganda. Thoth writes that too. And when he writes a failed weighing, the script is not angry. That matters. Cosmic order does not need temper to remain firm. He enters the result because it is the result. In that way, he is perhaps the most frighteningly fair of all Egyptian gods. He will not save you by sentiment. He will not condemn you by mood. He will place your truth exactly where it belongs in the ledger of things. Then comes Amit, even softened by gentle telling. Amit is a chilling presence. She is not a demon who delights in chaos. She is a function, a terrible necessary function. If the heart is too heavy for truth, it is given to her, not tortured, not theatrically punished, consumed. The soul loses its chance at the ordered afterlife. It suffers what many interpreters call the second death, the collapse of spiritual continuity. To the Egyptians, this was an almost unbearable fate. Not pain alone, but erasure from meaningful endurance. And still, Thoth records it. Perhaps that is one of the hardest elements to face. The divine scribe is not only present for glory, for justified kingship, for wise calculations beneath moonlight. He is present for annihilation too, because a universe that preserves only pleasant outcomes is not just. If there is loss, it must also be documented. If a soul destroys itself by the density of its own heart, even that must be entered accurately in the books of reality. Yet the hall is not built only for fear. It is built for passage. When the heart balances with the feather, when truth and soul are able to stand together without strain, then another kind of record begins. Thoth writes admission. He confirms that the dead may go on into the fields beyond, the ordered blessed realm, where grain grows high, waterways shine, labor is meaningful without becoming burden, and the company of the justified replaces the loneliness of the grave. Osiris presides there, changed forever by his own death, yet steady as the dark, rich soil from which new life rises. This is where Thoth and Osiris become beautifully linked. Osiris is the Lord of the dead, the king who knows rupture and return. Thoth is the one who makes the system intelligible and fair. One embodies transformed sovereignty. The other, the law that lets transformation happen without collapsing into confusion. Together they create a universe where death is not chaos, but a solemn form of administration. That sounds dry until you remember what the alternative would be. Without Thoth, The dead drift unmeasured. Reputation becomes everything, or nothing. Grief has no court, no method, no distinction between the merely unfortunate and the morally ruined. But with Thoth, every soul enters a process that says, your life mattered enough to be read carefully. His records of the dead are not thin summaries. They are layered archives. A deed is not only the deed. It is context, intention, consequence, pattern. The helping of one stranger may weigh differently if done for show than if done from genuine mercy. The same harsh word can be cruelty in one case, truth in another, desperate defense in a third. That is why the God of writing must also be the God of wisdom. A lesser clerk could collect events. Only Thoth can understand their relation. Sometimes I imagine his underworld archive extending farther than sight. Scrolls, tablets, names, histories, all arranged with impossible precision. Not a chaotic mountain of guilt and virtue, but ordered shelves of human complexity. Here are the records of rulers who built cities and also broke promises. Here the records of healers, liars, mothers, thieves, musicians, judges, builders, priests, children. Each life entered not as a slogan, but as a pattern. What a comfort, in a way, to be known like that. Not simplified, not flattened into one worst act or one flattering title. Known in sequence, proportion, weight. This perhaps is why scribes and scholars loved Thoth so deeply. He is not only the inventor of symbols, but the defender of nuance. He preserves complexity against the laziness of forgetting. And the underworld, in his care, becomes strangely bureaucratic in the most sacred sense. That is not an insult. Egypt understood that eternal life would require procedures. Gates must be identified, names learned, fields assigned, offerings tracked, souls sorted, relations between living and dead maintained. Prayers sent from tomb chapels must reach the proper recipients. Ritual errors must be corrected. New dead must be processed. Memory must be archived. Cosmic justice must remain consistent across generations. Someone has to run all that. Of course, it would be Thoth. He probably improved the filing system within the first week. There is something almost charming in imagining that. The underworld is solemn, yes, but not incompetent. One can feel his influence in every clean category, every verified statement, every corrected misentry. The same God who measured the sky would hardly tolerate a disordered afterlife. His role also extends beyond the moment of judgment itself. He records prayers offered by the living on behalf of the dead. He witnesses spells copied into tombs. He oversees the sacred texts that later people call the Book of the Dead, though it is really a collection of formulas, directions, protections, and names designed to help a soul move safely through peril toward justified life. Such texts belong to him naturally. They are maps through uncertainty. They are writing used not merely to remember, but to survive. If you have ever felt calmed by a written instruction in a difficult moment, some clear set of steps when fear was trying to turn your mind to water, then you already understand a little of why Thoth mattered so much. He does for the dead what the best writing does for the living. He gives shape to ordeal, and the ordeal is real. The duat is not soft. There are dangers, confusions, beings that threaten, thresholds that test, but with names, formulas, proper memory, and the hope of a heart not made too dense, one can pass through. Every one of those aids falls somehow under Thoth. The right word at the right gate. The right sequence remembered in darkness. The right identity preserved. This is moonlit intelligence, serving frightened souls. There is another subtle beauty here. The God who once wrote the measures of creation now measures what creation has done with its chance. From first dawn to final judgment, Thoth keeps continuity. He is there at the beginning with geometry. He is there at the end with scales. In between, he fills libraries, teaches scribes, watches gods argue, repairs what chaos breaks, and enters every significant thing in the books of being. By the time one has sat quietly in the Hall of Two Truths for a while, one begins to understand why the Egyptians never treated writing as a trivial skill. If a line can preserve your name, guide your soul, support justice, or reveal whether a life carried truth lightly enough to endure, then script is not decoration. It is survival. Soon, however, the calm of the hall will be challenged again. Set does not vanish from the cosmos simply because Osiris has found his new throne and the dead have found their scales. Chaos resents administration. Violence resents records. And the same Thoth who writes the verdicts of the dead will once more have to turn from the ledger toward conflict, because Set is not finished troubling the order of things. And another life, still young and not yet secure, will need the full cunning of the divine scribe to survive. The trouble with chaos is that it rarely accepts a single defeat as final. Set has been judged. Osiris has been restored into another form of kingship. The underworld has its court, its scales, its procedures, its grave and balanced order. Thoth has done what only he could do. He has turned grief into law, law into continuity, continuity into a world where death itself can be managed without surrendering to formless terror. And still, the red god remains. He remains in desert winds, in anger that flares too fast, in storms that erase roads, in ambition that cannot tolerate lawful inheritance. Most of all, he remains in the fact that Isis is carrying the child of Osiris, and that child, Horus, is a future Set cannot permit if he can help it. This begins another long labor for Thoth, though the texture of it changes. In the Hall of Two Truths, he presided over stillness. Here he must work amid pursuit, concealed, strategy, and magical defense. He becomes, if you like, less the court recorder and more the supreme intelligence officer of the cosmos. Though of course he would do the job with far better handwriting than any modern bureaucracy deserves. Isis must hide. The child she carries is not only a son. He is continuity. Legitimate succession. The possibility that violence will not have the final word over kingship. In Horus, the torn line of Osiris may rise again, not by undoing death, but by transmitting right through it. Set knows this. So he seeks not merely vengeance, but preemption. There is something especially tense about this phase of the myth, because so much depends on concealment. No public tribunal can solve the problem yet. No proclamation can keep an unborn heir safe. One must use marsh, cave, hut, island, reeds, spells, disguises, whispers, roots. The great visible structures of kingship give way to the fragile hidden architecture of survival. Thoth excels here too. He calculates safe places. He knows the lay of the land and the movement of threat. In some stories, Isis hides in the marshes of the delta, among papyrus thickets and damp paths where water holds the moon in broken strips. It is a perfect landscape for Thoth. Reed, water, silence, shifting roots, small sounds. A world where attention matters more than force. I can almost feel him there, pale and focused beneath the late moon, reading tracks in mud no ordinary god would bother to understand. Set sends dangers. Sometimes they are direct. Sometimes they are serpents, scorpions, au fever, poison, creatures or agents shaped by desert malice. Sometimes they are subtler, rumors, disturbances, trails deliberately laid to expose the hiding place. Chaos does not always charge. Sometimes it sniffs. Thoth answers with protection. Here we begin to see more clearly why he becomes so central to Egyptian magic. He is not a god of vague wonders. His spells are precise, timed, structured. He knows which name must be spoken first, which second, which sign must be traced over a body or threshold, what herb belongs to healing, what phrase can drive venom backward through a wound, what rhythm steadies a frightened heart so it can hear instruction. There is a famous strain of Egyptian tradition in which the child Horus is bitten or poisoned while hidden in the marsh, and Isis cries out in terror. The marsh grows hushed. The child weakens. Everything narrows toward that little body, that small, fragile future hanging between breath and stillness. In comes Thoth, or else his power through sacred speech, and the poison is addressed directly, named, commanded, reversed. This is classic Thoth. He defeats danger not by noise, but by exact language. Honestly, I find that beautiful. The universe is full of blunt force, yet the remedy arrives as knowledge properly spoken. The god of writing saves a child by arranging reality through words. It is one of the most Egyptian ideas imaginable, and one of the loveliest. Imagine the scene. Reeds pressing against damp wind. Insects humming low over black water. Isis bent over the child with the sort of fear that strips even goddesses down to the raw simplicity of love. Then Thoth arrives, carrying not panic but order. He kneels. He examines. He names the venom, its rot, its lie, its presumption. He invokes the greater law, under which poison has no rightful claim over this life, and little by little the child returns. That image alone explains why generations later healing spells in Egypt would call upon Thoth. He knows how affliction works, because he knows how order works. He can untie a knot because he understands how knots are formed. As Horus grows, Thoth's role changes again. No longer only protector of the hidden child, he becomes tutor, strategist, and quiet shaper of kingship. Horus is fierce by nature, bright, proud, wounded by inheritance before he has even had a chance to live freely. He will need courage, yes, but courage is the easiest thing to overproduce in a young god. What he needs more is discipline, timing, judgment, the ability to face Set without becoming Set. That is a subtle education. Thoth teaches in ways that fit his own nature. Not loud speeches under banners, not empty praise. He teaches sequence, cause, consequence. He teaches that a rightful king must know more than how to strike. He must know how to wait, how to hear a claim, how to identify deceit that clothes itself in legal language, how to hold rage without letting it write policy, how to distinguish justice from appetite. One can imagine the lessons taking place in many settings. Beneath temple shade, with wax tablets and diagrams, on a roof at night, mapping stars, so that the boy learns what order looks like above before he is asked to enforce it below. In court chambers, reviewing old disputes to see where truth hid beneath testimony. In marshes, learning patience from still water. In ritual space, learning the power of names, because to know the name of a thing is to know how it participates in the world. I like to think Thoth also taught him humor, at least a little. A young, avenging air can become unbearable without it. The god who invents writing must have known the importance of perspective. Somewhere in those long years of tutoring, there was probably a dry remark made at the expense of hot-headedness. Somewhere, Horus learned that an opponent can sometimes be defeated faster by precision than by drama. It would have done him good. The conflict with Set, when it fully unfolds, is not a single neat duel. That would be too easy. It is a long, contested process of claims, challenges, battles, injuries, hearings, reversals, and divine politics. Different gods take sides or shift emphasis. The matter of who should rule Egypt is argued repeatedly. Force alone cannot resolve it, because force is part of what made the crisis in the first place. Yet law alone cannot simply glide over the violence and inheritance at stake. The whole cosmos seems to lean toward the question. And there in the middle, again and again, is Thoth. He documents proceedings. He advises. He heals. He corrects distortions. He makes sure that verdicts do not drift into madness under the pressure of divine pride. There are episodes in which Horus is injured. Set is injured. Eyes are lost. Forms are changed. Contests take bizarre symbolic shape. Boats of stone are raced. Transformations occur. Egyptian myth does not dislike strangeness. Yet, through all of it, Thoth performs the same deeper function. He keeps the struggle interpretable. Without him, the feud would collapse into endless retaliatory energy. With him, it becomes a process through which legitimacy can eventually emerge. There is one image especially worth lingering over. The eye of Horus, wounded in conflict, must be restored. That eye will later become one of Egypt's most powerful symbols of healing, wholeness, and protected integrity. Who helps restore it? Thoth, of course. The god who repaired the scattered king now repairs the damaged heir. He is the physician of continuity. Think how much is contained in that. Vision injured by violence is not abandoned. It is healed by wisdom. The future of rightful order, symbolized by the eye, survives because knowledge intervenes. Again and again, Egyptian myth says the same thing in different forms. Force breaks. Wisdom restores. At last, Horus is recognized. The succession is not simple, not cheap, not merely emotional. It has been tested through danger, law, and endurance. Osiris remains king of the dead. Horus takes rightful kingship among the living. Set is not erased from existence, because Egypt never believes the cosmos can simply abolish every harsh thing. But he is bounded, assigned, limited, put where he belongs. The desert remains desert. Storm remains storm. Chaos is given margin, not throne. Thoth has helped achieve one of the greatest political and spiritual settlements in mythology. And this raises his stature even higher. He is no longer just the scribe of facts, nor only the judge of souls, nor merely the inventor of signs. He is now the indispensable architect of survivable order. He knows how to preserve a world that includes danger without surrendering rule to danger. That is a rare intelligence, perhaps the rarest. From here, his mastery over magic becomes even more central. The Egyptians did not separate magic from knowledge in the way modern people often try to do. Properly understood, magic is applied knowledge of the hidden correspondences that bind things together. Names matter. Numbers matter. Gesture, sequence, timing, purity, symbol, direction, celestial conditions, all matter. A formula is not powerful because it is mysterious. It is powerful because it is correct. That is why Thoth becomes the great master of Heka, the sacred force we flatten into the word magic. He did not invent power itself, but he understood how to shape it into usable forms. A spell under Thoth is almost like architecture made of language. If one element is wrong, the structure strains. If all is exact, unseen force moves cleanly. Imagine his workshop, if one may call it that. Not a vulgar room of smoke and random glitter, but a disciplined chamber. Tables of tools arranged by use, reeds and palettes, measuring cords, bowls of mineral pigments, stones carved with signs, jars containing herbs dried at proper lunar phases, shelves of copied formulas, lamps placed so that light strikes the work without distorting color or line. Somewhere a brazier low and steady. Somewhere a papyrus already open to a page on antidotes, protections, transformations, or invocations. This room would smell of resin, warm stone, old papyrus, and thought itself. Here Thoth tests utterance. He studies the relation between a spoken name and the force it calls. He investigates how script fixes vibration into visible order. He refines healing formulas so they can be used by trained priests and physicians. He develops protective words for travelers, pregnant women, rulers, and tombs. He examines the edge where blessing becomes coercion, because he must know both if he is to guard against misuse. I suspect this is why later ages found him so endlessly fertile as a figure. He is a god for anyone who senses that reality is textured, not flat. That words do not just describe, but act. That mathematics can be sacred. That writing can become medicine, law, invocation, shield. His magic also links him more deeply to Ra. Now we come to another great office of Thoth, his place beside the solar god. In many traditions, he becomes the tongue of Ra, the interpreter of divine will, the one who knows how the highest intention is to be spoken so that it becomes effective in the world. This is a profound role. To be the tongue of the sun is to stand at the exact point where thought becomes command. Morning by morning, one can imagine Thoth at the edge of dawn, already awake before the rim of light lifts clear. The sky still blue-black, the eastern horizon only beginning to pale. Water birds quiet, priests not yet fully at prayer. In that seam between dark and day, Thoth is alert. The baboon form especially belongs here, crying toward sunrise, greeting emergence, intelligent hands, ready for the labor of another ordered day. Ra must cross the heavens. That journey is not simply a visual event. It is governance. Time, heat, growth, visibility, life, all depend on it. And yet Ra, blazing and kingly, is not always the deity one imagines stopping to sort every subtle consequence, every hidden dispute, every procedural complexity. That is where Thoth becomes invaluable. He advises, he clarifies, he articulates. He is what makes power intelligible. The image of Thoth on the solar bark is one of my favorites in Egyptian religion. The boat of the sun crossing day, then descending into night, accompanied by beings whose roles are not ornamental, but vital. There is danger on that voyage. Above all, there is the serpent of chaos, Apophis, forever trying to halt the solar course, to return existence to collapse and non-continuation. Against that danger, brute force helps. Yes, but so do names, formulas, foresight, and exact timing. Again, the scribe is indispensable. He tracks celestial regularity. He helps maintain the calendar. He keeps festival dates aligned with cosmic pattern. He knows when a ritual should fall, when a star will rise, how moon and sun can be reconciled in sacred time. It is not enough that the world exists. It must be synchronized. Anyone who has ever tried to manage even a family gathering knows how miraculous scheduling can be. Thoth does it for the cosmos. This leads naturally toward his lunar office, though perhaps we are only beginning to feel it fully. The moon is measure. The moon is periodic wisdom. The moon is the softer lamp by which secrets and calculations survive after sunset. Ha blazes, but Thoth counts. Ra rules day, but Thoth ensures recurrence. One may say the universe shines by the sun and remains legible by the moon. As his role widens, so does his following among humans. Scribes still honor him first, of course. But now priests, judges, healers, magicians, astronomers, and royal advisors all begin to see him as their patron too. Who else combines exact writing, moral seriousness, cosmic timing, healing speech, and political intelligence? He is the god of anyone whose work depends on getting things right, where error would ripple outward into disaster. A courtier might pray to him before speaking carefully to a king, a physician before mixing remedy, a judge before rendering a difficult decision, a temple astronomer before tracking a lunar cycle that determines a festival, a grieving mother before reciting words over a sick child, a scribe before entering a king's land grant so that a future family does not suffer from one badly copied sign. All of this is Thoth's territory. And still, for all this grandeur, he remains emotionally subtle. He does not tend to dominate myths through spectacle. He enters where confusion threatens and leaves clarity behind. He is moonlight on procedure, silver on papyrus, reed on wet ink, the cool hand near the fevered child, the witness standing by the scale, the measured correction in a room full of divine ego, the chart of the stars after the quarrel has ended. He is never the simplest god to dramatize, which may be why he endures so well. He feels close to how intelligence actually saves us, quietly, repeatedly, without demanding applause every time. By the time this part of his story settles, the path ahead is clear. A god like this cannot remain only a participant in mythic events. He must become a teacher, a founder, a source. If writing, law, healing, magic, mathematics, astronomy, and royal council all run through him, then the next natural step is the building of schools, libraries, initiations, sacred texts, all the deliberate machinery by which wisdom survives beyond one generation. The victories over Set proved that order needs more than weapons. It needs transmission. And Thoth, who has spent ages transmitting the universe to itself, is almost ready to build that lasting house of knowledge. Now the work becomes quieter, and in some ways even greater. A battle can save a kingdom for a day. A judgment can save it for a generation. But a school, a true school, can save it for centuries. Thoth understands this with the calm certainty of someone who has watched too many crises rise from ignorance, vanity, and badly measured power. If order is to endure, wisdom cannot remain scattered like rare jewels in the pockets of a few gods. It must be taught, copied, guarded, practiced, breathed into new minds before the old minds fade. So the image changes again. No longer only the moonlit healer in the reeds, nor the grave recorder in the Hall of Two Truths, nor the strategist beside Horus. Thoth now becomes the founder of institutions. It sounds almost modern, which makes me smile a little, because one suspects he would have loved a well-run archive and despised a sloppy filing room with a passion that could part seas. But for the Egyptians, this is not ordinary administration. It is sacred architecture for knowledge itself. Imagine the first house of teaching raised under his guidance. It stands where different powers meet. The air is dry enough to preserve papyrus, yet near enough to living water that the mind never forgets where all measurement began. The walls are laid according to proportion, because random walls make for random thought. The chambers align to stars not from vanity, but because learning should remember the sky. Courtyards gather light at certain hours. Shadows fall at useful angles across writing tables. There is a chamber for copying, a chamber for recitation, a chamber for watching the heavens, a chamber for silence. Everything has a place. Everything encourages attention. If you were standing there with me, you would notice the smell first. Papyrus reed, soot ink, warm limestone, old wood, beeswax, the faint mineral breath of ground pigments. You would hear the soft drag of reed pens, murmured repetitions, sand shaken across fresh ink, the turning of a scroll, sandals on smooth floors, a teacher stopping behind a student not to scold, but to adjust a line by the width of a fingernail. Under Thoth, precision is not fussiness. It is devotion. The first lessons are simple and not simple at all. How to hold the pen so the wrist does not tire too quickly. How to mix black ink and red ink. How to cut a reed. How to sit long without fighting your own spine. How to breathe steadily so the hand does not tremble. These things matter. Every beautiful system begins in small habits. A civilization can be preserved or damaged by the shape of a copied sign. One sleepy apprentice can turn a prayer into nonsense. One careless curve can move a border, alter a medicine, confuse a calendar, anger a god, or embarrass an official for generations, which is perhaps the most terrifying possibility of all. Then come the signs themselves. The student learns that a symbol is never only itself. A bird can be a bird, but also a sound, also a concept, also an offering to memory. Water can be written as water and still carry the old shiver of none beneath it. A feather is a feather, but in the right place, it becomes truth, justice, balance, cosmic correctness, the very thing a heart must meet. This is why hieroglyphic writing feels alive. It is not a dead code. It is a field of presences. Thoth teaches that to write well is not merely to copy appearances, but to know the layered dignity of every mark. And so the school widens. Mathematics enters. Of course it does. Thoth would never build a great tradition on ink alone. Counting becomes proportion. Proportion becomes geometry. Geometry becomes temple, field, granary, a canal, and star path. Students learn that number is not an abstract game floating above life. Number determines whether flood water is guided or wasted, whether a wall stands or leans, whether a roof collapses or endures, whether a sacred room receives dawn at the proper moment. The universe is generous to those who calculate honestly. Astronomy follows naturally. At night, the students climb to roof terraces or open courts. They learn the regular risings of stars, the slow drift of certain lights, the language of seasons inscribed in the sky. Under Thoth, the heavens are not distant decoration. They are text. Readable text. A lesson in recurrence, timing, patience. There is something deeply soothing in imagining those young scholars under a black Egyptian sky. Oil lamps dimmed. One old teacher pointing with a reed or a staff, explaining why this star returns here, why that cycle matters for festivals, why the moon is not merely beautiful but measurable. I have always loved that union of wonder and discipline. The night sky can make a person dream. Thoth teaches them also to count. Medicine enters too, because wisdom that cannot bind a wound is incomplete. Students of healing learn plants, minerals, timing, pulse, fever, pain, and the dangerous pride of assuming one already knows enough. They copy remedies. They memorize anti-venom formulas. They study the relation between body and speech, because an illness may require a potion, a touch, a prayer, and an exact phrase in proper order. Under Thoth, medicine is neither crude superstition nor sterile mechanism. It is attentive order applied to suffering. Law also belongs in his schools. How could it not? He has seen the feud of gods, the weighing of hearts, the cost of unmeasured speech. So future judges and royal advisors are trained to listen, compare testimony, search motive, and resist the intoxication of quick certainty. That last lesson is rare in any age. To delay verdict until the facts settle. To ask what is missing. To distinguish a wounded truth from a polished lie. These are Thoth's gifts to the courtroom. As the schools grow, so do the texts. Here the source story becomes especially rich. Thoth is not merely a teacher standing before living students. He is the force behind the creation of sacred books, handbooks, star charts, ritual calendars, healing formulas, spells for protection, instructions for temple procedure, and writings hidden from the unready. The library around him becomes legendary in imagination because it must. A god who records everything and measures everything cannot live among scraps. So imagine the library, not a dusty heap, though dust is there in its proper soft way. More a breathing order of chambers. Scrolls arranged by discipline, then by temple, then by level of secrecy, then by ritual use. Shelves of papyrus bundles tied with linen tags, boxes of wax tablets, cases of astronomical notes, rolls wrapped against damp, catalog lists hanging by doorways, senior scribes moving through aisles with astonishing gentleness, as though each shelf is a row of sleeping birds that must not be startled. Some texts are practical. Grain tallies, canal repairs, the dimensions of columns, the timing of festivals. Others are charged with deeper force. Hymns, ritual sequences, dream interpretations, medical prayers, invocations to guide the dead past the gates of the Duat. Then deeper still are the mysteries. The writings that are copied only under oath and under stars chosen with care. Texts concerning transformation, the soul, the hidden names of powers, the relation between number and form, the ways in which speech can tilt reality without breaking it. This is where Thoth becomes not just a god of knowledge, but a guardian of thresholds. Not everything is for everyone. That is one of the least fashionable truths, and one of the oldest. A child should not be handed a king's seal. A fool should not be given a formula he will use for vanity. A cruel mind should not receive tools that magnify intention. So the schools of Thoth develop degrees. outer court learning for many, inner study for the dedicated, initiation for the disciplined, deeper rites for the trustworthy. At the center, secrets that are not hidden because they are mean-spirited, but because they are powerful. The initiation scenes almost write themselves in candlelight. A novice washed and robed in clean linen. A corridor walked in silence. Questions asked at a threshold. Lamps burning low. A text presented. An oath taken over reed. Ink and feather. Perhaps a senior priest lifts a scroll and says, in effect, that knowledge does not belong to the vain. It passes through the worthy, and may leave the one who serves himself with it. Then a seal is broken. A formula is read aloud once, slowly. The initiate hears not merely words, but weight. You can see why later ages would become fascinated with Thoth in this mode. He is no longer only a mythic participant. He is the prototype of the hidden master, the patron of sacred learning, the one at the center of schools where symbols are not ornamental, but transformative. His script itself begins to feel magical, because of course it does. If a sign can preserve memory, carry law, invoke a deity, bind a spirit, protect a tomb, heal a child, guide a soul, or align a temple with stars, then writing is no longer passive. It acts. Under Thoth, every properly made sign is almost a small machine of meaning. Not a cold machine, a living one. There is a wonderful seriousness to this, but a little comedy too, if we are honest. Somewhere in one of those schoolrooms, there must have been an exhausted apprentice who copied the same line 50 times because his ibis sign looked more like a very offended chicken. I prefer to think Thoth noticed, sighed with immortal patience, and made him do it 50 more. The gods may tolerate chaos in deserts and storms. In handwriting, perhaps less so. As knowledge spreads through these institutions, Egypt itself changes. Architecture becomes more exact because geometry is taught with reverence. Temple complexes become libraries as well as sanctuaries. Priests become scholars. Scholars become healers, judges, record keepers, astronomers, ritual technicians. Royal courts rely on scribes, whose craft is protected by the aura of Thoth. Governance begins to depend on writing not only as memory, but as legitimacy. If it is not entered, measured, witnessed, and sealed, does it truly stand? That feels like a Thoth question. And then the schools produce something even more significant than skilled professionals. They produce a style of mind. A Thoth-shaped mind does not rush toward spectacle. It observes, compares, writes down, revise, returns to the star chart, checks the dosage, confirms the witness, notices a missing number, suspects a copied error, understands that beautiful language without structure is wind, and structure without moral center is a trap. This is wisdom as temperament. Measured, humane, exact. From there, the mystery traditions deepen. Students who prove themselves are led beyond practical expertise into metaphysical study. They are taught that every visible order reflects a deeper one, that measurements in a temple can mirror measurements in the heavens, that the body the state, and the cosmos can all fall into sickness through imbalance. That purification is not only bathing, but alignment. That speech can damage or restore because reality is textured by vibration and pattern. That to know a true name is to know how a thing stands in relation to the whole. These teachings gradually produce an image of Thoth that exceeds any single myth. He becomes the hidden organizer of understanding itself, the patron behind astronomy, law, medicine, writing, ritual, mathematics, and memory. A god of interconnection. A god for people who suspect that the world is not random but readable, if only one is patient enough. This patient readability becomes one of the loveliest themes in his story. Under Thoth, nothing is too small to matter. A measurement of grain, the angle of a roof, the timing of a prayer, the wording of a treaty, the order of the stars, the spelling of a name on a tomb wall. All these things participate in cosmic order. Not because the cosmos is petty, but because it is continuous. A misplaced detail can ripple. A corrected detail can heal. As the libraries swell and the schools mature, records begin to accumulate, not only about gods and rites, but about history itself. Dynasties, flood heights, famines, building works, victories, failures, births, deaths, appointments, omens, reforms. It is very easy for rulers to prefer glorious memory to exact memory. This is where Thoth's influence becomes morally important. The scribe under his protection is not meant to flatter only. He is meant to preserve. That ideal is never perfectly lived, because people remain people and kings remain kings. Still, the existence of the ideal matters. It creates a tension inside power. A ruler may want praise, but he also needs records, and records have a way of surviving moods. A later generation can open a chest, unroll a text, and find that what was done was not quite what the monument claimed. There too, quietly, Thoth continues his work. His teachings also cross boundaries. What begins in temple and court begins to leak into artisan workshops, households, village shrines, and tomb chapels. A mother may not read a formal archive, yet she may know a protective formula attributed to Thoth. A mason may not study celestial doctrine in full, yet he may use proportions rooted in sacred geometry. A village healer may not enter the deepest libraries, yet she may inherit a remedy shaped by that great tradition of measured care. Wisdom descends in forms people can bear. This makes Thoth unusually generous for so exact a god. He guards thresholds, yes, but he also understands adaptation. Not every soul needs the same amount of knowledge. What matters is proper fit. The novice receives what will steady him. The physician, what will heal. The judge, what will clarify. The priest, what will align ritual with heaven. The dead, what will guide them past gates. The king, what may humble him, if the king is lucky enough to listen. Soon, very soon, this long work of teaching and preserving will transform the image of Thoth once again. The god of schools, libraries, sacred books, and initiated wisdom will begin to look less like one divine person among others, and more like a principle, the very principle by which order becomes intelligible, by which civilization remembers itself, by which truth is transmitted across catastrophe. That is the final movement waiting ahead. The reed has become a lineage. The archive has become a world. The teacher has almost become wisdom itself. And once that change begins, Thoth will no longer belong only to one courtroom, one temple, one mythic crisis, or even one age. He will belong to every seeker who enters a quiet room, lights a lamp, opens a text, and hopes that careful thought might bring a little more order to the dark. By the time we arrive at the last transformation of Thoth, it feels less like the ending of a biography and more like the widening of a horizon. He has already done so much. He has risen from the first dark waters with consciousness sharp as a reed tip. He has measured the space between sky and earth. He has written creation into durable form. He has stood beside the scales of the dead. He has restored what violence shattered. He has healed the child who would become king. He has advised Ra, mastered the moon, built schools, guarded texts, organized mysteries, and taught generations how to read the world without destroying it. At some point, a god doing all this ceases to feel merely personal. He becomes structural. This is what the later tradition seems to sense so deeply. Thoth is no longer just the ibis-headed divine official attending this or that sacred event. He becomes the living principle of wisdom itself, the quiet intelligence inside order, the lucid thread running through law, ritual, mathematics, medicine, writing, memory, and revelation. If Egypt had a way of saying that the universe could think carefully, that thought would wear the face of Thoth. It happens slowly, as the best transformations do. Priests working in different cities notice that when they reach the deepest part of any discipline, whether astronomy or healing or sacred speech, they seem to meet the same presence. Scribes in distant temples invoke him for accuracy. Judges invoke him for fairness. Healers for correct remedies. The dead for guidance. Students for comprehension. Rulers for counsel, though perhaps not always with great success. All roads of careful knowledge keep bending toward the same silver figure. And then prophecy begins to gather around him more intensely. This, too, makes sense. A being who records all things, measures all cycles, and understands cause so intimately will naturally see further than others. Yet Thoth is not usually portrayed as a prophet in the loud, ecstatic sense. He does not fling himself into revelation like a storm possessed. His foresight is calmer. He knows where patterns lean. He sees what consequences are already on their way because he understands the mathematics of moral and cosmic motion. I find that far more unnerving than dramatic vision. Imagine approaching an oracle of Thoth, not a wild cave with shrieking vapors, but a quiet sanctuary where every sound is deliberate. You bring a question. It must be stated cleanly. No muddled vanity, no cheap curiosity. The priests prepare. The room is purified. A text is placed. A star perhaps observed. A lamp steadied. The answer that comes is not a theatrical riddle, but a precise unveiling of relation. If you continue in this direction, this follows. If you alter this variable, another outcome becomes possible. The future is not chaos. It is consequence. This is one of the reasons Thoth feels so modern and so ancient at once. He does not erase mystery. He makes mystery legible without making it small. His prophecies shape Egyptian consciousness over a long time. Kingdoms rise and fall, and people return to his principles because they are less tied to one dynasty than to the very possibility of durable civilization. If a court becomes corrupt, it needs records corrected. If a calendar drifts, it needs recalculation. If ritual becomes empty display, it needs meaning restored. If power forgets law, it needs the memory of the scales. If knowledge fragments, it needs libraries. If speech coarsens, it needs better words. In every one of these crises, Egypt could imagine returning to Thoth. That is the sign of a deity who has become archetypal. The mystery traditions deepen this further. In the more esoteric imagination, Thoth is not merely the patron of hidden teachings. He is the source from which all true teachings descend. One might say that other gods rule domains, but Thoth governs intelligibility itself. You can build a temple to another god and fill it with offerings, yet without measures, inscriptions, calendars, formulas, and the interpretive intelligence to keep the rites coherent. Even that temple would fall into confusion. There is a way in which every sacred order in Egypt secretly depends on him. This is why later traditions beyond Egypt become so fascinated by him. Though I will stay within the mood of our story, you can feel the drift already. A god of writing, number, moonlight, medicine, sacred speech, and hidden books is never going to remain provincial. He is too transferable, too universally useful, too close to the human experience of trying to understand. Civilizations love warrior gods. Yes, they also love harvest gods, mother goddesses, kings of thunder. But the figure who stands behind the possibility that knowledge might save us, that one travels far. Still, inside Egypt, he remains beautifully Egyptian. He remains linked to the moon and its phases, to the measured nights, to ibis tracks in wet places, to the pale edge of dawn before the sun commits itself fully, to the old habit of exact copying, to the conviction that truth is not merely a moral preference but a structural necessity. He remains close to Ma'at because wisdom without balance turns monstrous. He remains close to Osiris because writing must serve justice, not vanity alone. He remains close to Ra because insight must become action if the day is to proceed. This final stage of his story also softens it. Strangely, not that he becomes sentimental. Thoth never melts into vagueness. But as he turns more fully into the principle of wisdom, he becomes available in quieter ways. Not everyone will see him as a towering divine official standing in moonlit courts. Some will feel him as the sudden order in a difficult thought, the exact word that arrives after silence, the elegant proof after confusion, the line of a text that clarifies years of inner fog, the calm that comes when facts are finally laid out honestly on a table. That, too, is Thoth. I have always loved gods who can be felt in stillness. There is a scene I keep imagining. A lone scribe late at night, copying by lamplight. Everyone else has gone. The oil is low. His neck aches. He has recopied a damaged line 3 times, and still it does not satisfy him. Outside, the city is mostly quiet. Somewhere, a dog. Somewhere, distant water. He sits back, rubs his eyes, leans in once more, and suddenly sees how the missing sign should fit. Not guessed, not forced. Sane. That moment, that little clean click in the mind, feels to me like a visitation of Thoth, just as surely as any mythic appearance. Or imagine a judge listening to 2 difficult cases, each with tears, each with pressure from powerful men, and deciding not to rush, deciding to review the record one more time because something in the first account felt too smooth. That pause, that refusal to be bullied by urgency, is also sacred. That too belongs to him. Or a physician who notices one small symptom others ignored and saves a child because of it. Or an architect who corrects an angle before a roof is laid. Or a grieving daughter who copies a funerary text carefully because she wants her father to have every gate word he needs. Or a priest recalibrating a festival date so that heaven and earth meet properly once again. These are all humble faces of Thoth. He becomes, in the best sense, ordinary without ever becoming small. The schools he founded continue, and the idea of them grows richer in memory. They become not only places, but symbols of what a life ordered toward wisdom could be. Some students enter to learn practical skill and discover reverence. Some come seeking prestige and are humbled by discipline. Some arrive frightened and leave clear-minded. Some are never admitted to the deeper chambers because knowledge is not a costume one is owed. Thoth remains both generous and selective. That balance matters. A god who gave everything to everyone without measure would not be wise. A god who hoarded everything forever would not be wise either. The library becomes his final great metaphor. Not one building alone. Not one archive with one set of shelves. More a cosmic collection in which every true thing has its place and relation. Every formula, every star path, every lawful boundary, every healed wound, every measured field, every judgment entered, every correct name of the dead, every scroll copied in faith, every lesson transmitted from teacher to pupil. Nothing important is lost if properly written into that order. This is perhaps the deepest comfort Thoth offers. That truth can be preserved. Not forever in every worldly form. No. Papyrus burns. Stone cracks. Dynasties collapse. Priests die. Languages thin and drift. Yet the deeper order remains recoverable because it was written into the fabric of things by intelligence at the beginning. Human beings can forget, but reality still leans toward legibility. This makes Thoth the god not only of knowledge, but of recoverability. If a civilization loses its way, there may still be texts. If the texts are broken, there may still be proportions in temples. If the temples fall, there may still be stars. If the stars are forgotten, there may still be the heart and the feather, the old relation between truth and weight. Somewhere the pattern waits to be read again. That is why his legacy feels so durable. He does not promise that nothing will be lost. Egypt knew too much about death and flood and political fragility for such naive optimism. What he offers instead is stronger. He offers methods by which loss can be answered. Records, ritual, teaching, measurement, initiation, memory, correct language, careful comparison, honest judgment. These are not glamorous protections, but they are the ones that last. As centuries pass within the imagination, one can feel Thoth standing farther and farther back behind the whole civilizational picture, and at the same time, closer and closer to every act of understanding within it. He is the first note and the hidden harmony, the designer and the marginal annotation, the moon over the roof school and the pen in the apprentice's hand, the keeper of secrets and the reason secrets can become teachings at all. There is also a tenderness in how his story ends, if ending is even the right word. He does not crash into some final, spectacular disappearance. He does not die heroically, nor does he rage against obscurity. He abides. A god of preservation should. He becomes the quiet certainty that wisdom remains possible, even after feuds, even after death, even after chaos, even after a text has been damaged and must be restored line by line. Especially then, if you were to walk through ancient Egypt at night in imagination, past riverbank, field, tomb, temple, court, library, school, marsh, and roof observatory, you would keep finding traces of him. A painted ibis on a wall, a scribe's palette set down to dry, a moon disk over black water, a child reciting signs, a priest checking a calendar, a healer whispering a formula over swelling flesh, a judge rereading testimony by dawn light, a funerary papyrus tucked beside a mummy, an architect muttering numbers before the foundation stone drops. All these small acts answer to the same God, and perhaps that is why his mythology feels so restful in the end. For all its courts and conflicts and cosmic responsibility, Thoth does not ask us to worship confusion. He does not romanticize chaos. He does not tell us that truth is simple, only that it is worth the effort of exact attention. He does not promise that death is easy, only that it can be met with preparation, with names, with records, with scales that do not lie. He does not promise that power will be kind, only that it may be checked by law, memory, and intelligent witness. He does not promise that knowledge will make us masters of everything, only that without it we are much easier prey. There is a deep gentleness in that honesty. So as our journey with him comes to a close, picture him once more, silver white against the first darkness, ibis beak bright as a stylus, or as the pale baboon calling toward sunrise, or seated with palette and reed beside the scales, or standing on the solar bark, watching the root, or in a hidden chamber of books where every scroll waits in order, or in a quiet school, correcting one student's line while stars drift above the roof. Every image is true in its way, because each reveals a function of wisdom. The world begins in confusion. A thought rises. A name is spoken carefully. A sign is made. The sky is measured. A law is entered. A wound is healed. A heart is weighed. A child is protected. A calendar is corrected. A library is built. A secret is guarded until it can be taught. And through all of it, the same still intelligence remains present. Not hurried, not boastful, not lost. That is Thoth, the eternal scribe, the keeper of divine measure, the judge who writes truly, the healer whose speech restores, the moonlit counselor, the founder of schools, the guardian of sacred texts, the living principle that makes wisdom possible wherever anyone chooses patience over noise, truth over vanity, and understanding over force. The lamp burns lower now. The papyrus has been rolled and tied. The scales stand quiet in their hall. The moon has crossed a little farther west. Somewhere along the Nile, the reeds barely move. Somewhere a last student sets down his pen. Somewhere a soul is guided safely because a formula was copied correctly. Somewhere a thought sharpens into clarity after long confusion. And in that small, clean brightness, the old God smiles without needing to be seen. Rest in that feeling for a moment. The universe is large and often difficult, but it is not unreadable. There are patterns. There are measures. There is memory. There is a way through darkness that does not depend on force, only on careful seeing and faithful record. That has always been Thoth's gift, and perhaps it remains his gift still. Now let the chambers of Egypt grow dim. Let the moon drift behind the temple roof. Let the last reed pen be washed and laid aside. Let the shelves of the cosmic library fall silent. Let the ibis fold its white wings by the river, and the baboon greet no more dawns for tonight. Let the scales rest level in the hall of two truths, and let every page we have turned settle softly back into place. You have followed him from first waters to final wisdom, from chaos to script, from script to law, from law to healing, from healing to kingship, from kingship to schools, from schools to eternity. There is nothing more to force tonight, only the soft afterglow of understanding and the long measured calm of a world still held together by names, numbers, memory, and truth. Good night.